Hi, how are you? Um, Today we're going to look at the Cold War at Home. You can find this in section 3 of chapter 13. That was linked earlier, and I will relink it with this. So anyway, today we're going to look at the Cold War at Home. You can see the 4 main topics that we're going to be looking at. Alger Hiss and Whittaker Chambers, so Hiss, the Rosenbergs, the Hollywood 10, and Joe McCarthy. So we're actually dealing with the Cold War and the Red Scare here at home. So there's a couple terms, they're really close and often used in an interchangeable manner, but I wanted to make sure that you've heard them both because they show up. So the communist sympathizer and fellow traveler. So when you look here, the communist sympathizer, easy for me to say, right, is a potential communist because he or she holds communist political views. So the key word is that they're potential communist. So they could be convinced to be a member of the Communist Party. Now the fellow traveler is a little bit different. Look at that. This person is someone who is sympathetic to communism. So they're like, yeah, it's not such a bad idea, but they're not really interested in becoming a communist. So a communist sympathizer would be someone that is potentially a member of the Communist Party. A fellow traveler is just someone that's like kind of a friend of it, but really doesn't want to become a member. So keep that in mind because that will show up later. So, all right. So the first story we are going to deal with is Whittaker Chambers and Alger Hiss. There's a short reading on this in your chapter. So let's go. So this is Alger Hiss right here. And this is Whittaker Chambers. So Whittaker Chambers is going to accuse Alger Hiss of being a spy for the Soviet Union. All right, so it's a long story. It's a long story. I listened to a presentation that was like much longer than I want to admit, but let's go with it. So Whittaker Chambers, he was a former member of the Communist Party. He's brilliant, all right? So you need to know this man is really smart, really well educated, and during the late 20s, early 30s, gets kind of caught up, if you would, in the Communist Party. It wasn't all that unusual at the time. If you think about it, the Great Depression is going on. The world isn't working like people think it's supposed to work, and so they're looking for something different. There's people standing in bread lines. They're really hungry. They can't pay their bills. And so people are thinking, what else could there be? And so a number of people are going to get involved in learning more about it, maybe claiming they are a member of the Communist Party. Whittaker Chambers was one of those that actually was a communist sympathizer and then became a member of the Communist Party and then spied. All right. So, former member of the Communist Party, he was an admitted spy for the Soviet Union. In 1938, he goes knocking on the FBI's door and basically says, hey, I was a spy. And the FBI is like, yeah, right. And doesn't really take him up on anything. It doesn't take what he has to say all that seriously. And so it's like, okay. He will eventually become an editor of Time magazine and really well thought of. People like him, but because he had been a spy, he acted quite peculiarly. So he would, if he was going to meet someone for lunch, he might make them take a taxi to one place, then another, then another, then another, and then finally make their way all the way back to about where they started. Anyway, it was kind of complicated. Nobody really understood why he did that. They just thought he was eccentric, and it was like, oh well. But he was a really good writer, gifted in that way. Anyway, you don't need to know any more than that for this. But in 1948, he's serving as an editor of Time magazine, and then he is going to get called before HUAC. HUAC is the House Un-American Activities Committee, and it was set up for the purpose of looking for people who were acting un-American, and becomes kind of this communist enemy. They're investigating, any and every communist person that they can possibly investigate. So Chambers gets called there, and he is going to actually tell HUAC that someone he knows by the name of Alger Hiss has spied for the Soviet Union. And Alger Hiss is really interesting because he was significant in the American government at the time. He served in the State Department. He had gone to both Yalta and Potsdam, and you should be familiar with those two events that would help to bring about an end to the war. So Alger Hiss, when he finds out that he was charged, he is going to go before HUAC and he's going to dismiss it. It's like, are you kidding me? I do all this. I am a member of the State Department. I work really hard. And HUAC initially just kind of says, okay. However, there was this new member of the House of Representatives on the committee, and his name, like he had just gotten back from World War II. He's from California. You might recognize his name, Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was on this committee, and he kind of had this gut feeling like, should we just continue this investigation of Alger Hiss? Should we? Like, is Whittaker Chambers pulling my leg? So Whittaker Chambers has already said, I was a spy. I'm no longer a spy. But Alger Hiss is a spy. Alger Hiss works for the government. He's high up. He's really well connected. He too is super duper smart. And he is saying, me? I'm not a spy. All right, so this is going to go on for a while. The investigation is going to go back and forth. There's going to be a number of hearings that they're involved with. Hiss gets really mad. Hiss then later, and Hiss says, I don't know anyone by the name of Whittaker Chambers. So then they ask him, but you know how you can be legally true and skirt an issue? They found that when he would respond to questions, he answered in ways that he could mean something else. But he was so smart. It was really subtle, so not everybody picked up on it. Richard Nixon was also a lawyer, and he did pick up on it. Okay? So Hiss will later say, well, maybe I knew Whittaker Chambers by another name. And so he will say, oh, there was this guy by the name of George Crosley that I knew in the 30s. And supposedly Whittaker Chambers had horrific teeth, just horrific. Like they were black and ground down and crooked and ugh. So anyway, that made a big impression. And Hiss describes this George Crosley as having, these horrible teeth. Well, anyway, Whittaker Chambers will have fixed his teeth, but that's a whole nother story that came in that big, long presentation that I listened to. Anyway, Chambers says publicly that Hiss was and could still be a communist. Hiss is going to say, hey, that's not true. That's slander. And so he sues Whittaker Chambers, right? So there's Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was a member of the House Un-American Activities Committee, right? So I mentioned that. All right, so now Chambers is thinking, what do I have? Do I have anything that was given to me? Because Whittaker Chambers would get information from Alger Hiss in the 30s, and he would take it. So these were documents. Let me go back. Alger Hiss worked for the State Department. You got that. He would give documents or pictures of documents or microfilm or copied documents to Whittaker Chambers. Whittaker Chambers would pass them on to his handler, his Soviet handler. And at one point, he is going to put some things in an envelope, some proof, and he takes it to, like, he owns this farm in Massachusetts, and his mom lives there, and he has a cousin that, like, helps out there. So he takes this envelope with this evidence, and it's sealed, and he says, if anything ever happens to me, pull this out. Don't forget that you have this. So the cousin takes it and he puts it, like, in some, like, hallway closet, like where you keep your towels and your sheets. So it's like a linen closet, right? And Whittaker Chambers decides, you know what? I need to go find that envelope. So he gets a hold of his cousin. His cousin tells him where it's at. So he goes to his farm in Massachusetts and he finds this envelope. And when he opens it up, there's, like, some of the pictures of the documents, they're blurry. So really, they weren't really very good evidence. But he's got microfilm. And microfilm, it's kind of like, an old camera film, but you would put it in a reader and you could turn the reader and then it would blow up the picture so that you could see it. Anyway, he had microfilm, a little canister of microfilm in this envelope. And he will take it and he's like, I hope this will work. I need to hide it somewhere. So he figured that someone was watching him or there was a chance of someone coming to his farm and ransacking his house to find it. So what he did was he took it out to, like, a garden behind the shed or behind the garage. And there were pumpkins growing out there. So he hollowed out, cut open the top of a pumpkin, or the bottom, I should say, hollowed it out, and then put the microfilm in there. And then he went to talk to Richard Nixon and some of the investigators for the HUAC committee. And so he got some investigators to come back with him, and he took them out to the pumpkin patch, and he pulled out this microfilm and gave it to them. And when they were able to get it developed so that they could see the documents, and those documents would have been things that only people like Alger Hiss, who worked in the State Department, could have had. So that's actually going to prove that Alger Hiss was a spy for the Soviet Union and provided information to them. Now, he had sued Whittaker Chambers, so Whittaker Chambers is going to lose his job. But because Alger Hiss had taken an oath that he was telling the truth at the time in front of the HUAC committee, he had actually lied. And so it was too late for him. I don't know the time, like what the legal time is for how long you can be charged with spying, but it was past that time. But he had lied to the HUAC committee. So Whittaker Chambers is actually going to be charged with perjury, and he's going to get sentenced to 5 years in prison and serve like 44 months. So what do we know? Whittaker Chambers was a spy. He also is going to work for Time magazine. He gets called in front of HUAC. When he's in front of HUAC, which is the House Un-American Activities Committee, which is charged with investigating people for communist activity, he names Alger Hiss. And Alger Hiss then, now this is a series of years. This is a series of years that it takes to unwind this whole story in HUAC. Alger Hiss says, no, I didn't do it. And initially, a lot of people believed Alger Hiss. And he had friends in high places, really good lawyers. And the lawyers kept getting him like to a hung jury. And so anyway, it just took a while. And Nixon kept at it. He just had this inkling that something was amok, if you would. And eventually there was proof that Whittaker Chambers could bring forth. And it was microfilm that he had stuck in a pumpkin to hide it until he could bring the investigators up and give it to them. So that is why they're called the pumpkin papers, is because the microfilm was put in there. Alger Hiss would eventually have to serve time in prison for perjury. Now, that is this information here. Now, here's some interesting stuff. This is Roosevelt, right? This is at Yalta. This is Alger Hiss. I mean, Alger Hiss is a big deal. He was, like I said, super smart. He did a lot of work with writing agreements and things. And he's a Soviet operative. So imagine Stalin sitting right here, understanding that Hiss is right here and supporting. Hiss is supposed to be supporting Roosevelt and actually supporting Churchill. This is Winston Churchill. Now, this is Alger Hiss here, and they are dealing with like munitions during World War II. And so he's playing a significant role in that. I found this super interesting. After the war, the U.S. and the Soviet Union brokered the border with Poland, right, the Polish border. And we know that the Soviet Union wanted Poland. Alger Hiss was actually part of the negotiations that would allow Stalin to get what he wanted. So there were people that didn't understand how the agreements, not necessarily the treaties, the documents that negotiated or showed the negotiated outcome would give the Soviet Union what they wanted. The ambassador to Poland, Arthur Bliss, actually resigned because he's like, how did this happen? Well, Alger Hiss played a role in that. They don't know for sure what Alger Hiss did, but Alger Hiss helped to write the agreement. So they don't know if Hiss threw it, but people believe that he could have. All right. Repatriation. This is new information for me, you guys. I went digging and found that after World War II, so during World War II, there were Russians who had fled Russia. They didn't want to be part of Russia. And often after a war, when people have there's a chance that if they would be sent back home, and they would be physically harmed, that something could happen to them, that they don't have to go back. All right. So the agreement is that these people who left can stay where they're at so that they're safe. I didn't know we did this. After the war, there were people who were living in East Germany who did not want to, or in Germany, who did not want to have to go back. They didn't want to go to Russia. We made an agreement, and Hiss was probably a part of it, where we would return those people. And what Stalin did was he put them in like prisoner of war camps, in gulags, and worked them. I don't know, to death. I don't know. There was a chance for that. We did not make that public for 50 years. It was an embarrassment, but we allowed it to happen. So I didn't know that was even the case. And this is like the slave labor. This is a picture of slave labor that they had to do in a gulag. And they actually called this the keel haul, which is a naval term. It's a penalty, and people often don't live through a keel haul. So, all right. So Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, that's the next story. Julius and the Rosenbergs were the only spies that were executed in 1953 during the Cold War. So these two, they're married, they have 2 children, and they're the only 2 that actually get executed because of their activity. So Julius Rosenberg was a communist. He worked at the Army Signal Corps Engineering Laboratories, which all this seems like, okay, I don't really understand why, but they're not known communists. That's the thing, you guys. So in 1939, Rosenberg became an agent for the USSR and worked under Alexander Feklisov. And in 1944, he actually becomes a recruiter. So he's been in the Communist Party, and after a period of time, they're looking to Rosenberg to find people to help them out, to recruit, to do little things to help the communists and the Soviet Union. One of the recruits is a man by the name of David Greenglass. Now, Greenglass happens to be Julius Rosenberg's wife's brother. So Rosenberg's brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg's brother-in-law. Rosenberg is actually going to get convicted in 1951, and his wife will too. In 1953 at Sing Sing, which is a correctional facility in New York, he will be executed, as will his wife. So their conviction, a lot of people didn't believe that they were actually communists and that they had done what they were convicted of doing. And so for a long period of time, I mean, we're talking decades, it was controversial as to whether or not they were communists. And the belief is that Ethel probably wasn't, at least not worthy of being executed. But there are documents in the National Archives that now you could go and see and find that Ethel was an accessory. So we have Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. They are convicted of spying. David Greenglass is the brother to Ethel Rosenberg. And so this is kind of how complicated this all gets. David Greenglass is going to join the Young Communist League before he entered the U.S. Army in 1943. Julius Rosenberg recommended his sister-in-law's apartment. Okay, so they would take pictures of different things, of documents, of people, of places, of drawings, because some of these people worked in the Manhattan Project. And they would use the Greenglass apartment to process the film. So David Greenglass Greenglass was assigned to the Manhattan Project. That was where he worked. And he would pass the information that he got to a man by the name of Harry Gold. I know. So Greenglass would testify that Julius and Ethel were a part of this. And Greenglass actually gives up Ethel. At first, he didn't say that Ethel was a part of it. He had protected her, but in order to protect his own wife, he throws Ethel under the bus. So Greenglass is going to go to prison. He gets like 14, 15 years. When he's done, he gets out and he can live under an assumed name with his wife, and he will die, not that long ago in 2014. Harry Gold was a member of the Communist Party, and he's part of all of this. and he is going to pass the information on about the Manhattan Project to a guy by the name of Klaus Fuchs. And all these people turn against the Rosenbergs, and they're witnesses, and it helps to convict Julius and Ethel. So it's kind of complicated, but these different people worked maybe at the Los Alamos, New Mexico facility, and they passed on information, and Julius and Ethel will pay the ultimate price. And this is Klaus Fuchs. He was a physicist. He was brilliant. He was actually, when they tested, the Trinity test is when they tested the atomic bomb, and Oppenheimer was overwhelmed with the success, if you would. And anyway, he is going to be handled by the same Soviet Feklisov, and he's convicted in 1950. He's going to serve 9 years in Britain, and then when he gets released, he goes to East Germany because he's still a Soviet. So the Venona Project, that is, counterintelligence is like spying, right? So we are spying on the spies. We are gathering information. And it comes under the National Security Agency, if you remember, after it was established. And it lasted for 37 years. It was a secret project, and there were people that were like cryptanalysts, which are code breakers, if you would. And so this woman here, Jean Grabeel, was the first cryptanalyst of the Venona Project. So there were a lot of women that did this, women who were really good at math. It's kind of an interesting thing. So the Rosenbergs had 2 children at the time. I think they were 7 and 9 when the Rosenbergs would be either convicted or killed. I don't recall. And so this is Michael here, and this is Robert down here. They are both very intelligent men. They both were professors. Michael here, Michael and Robert in 1975 would write this book, We Are Your Sons, and it's about the Rosenbergs. Robert got involved in the anti-war movement of the 1960s. He would become a lawyer. Michael is an econ professor. They're both still alive, as near as I can tell. But they would be adopted, and they would be adopted by the Meerpols. Meerpols, and Abel Meerpol was a composer. I don't know much about his music, but he was a composer. So, yeah. Okay, so think about what you need to know about the Rosenbergs. Joe McCarthy, I know this is getting long, but we need to get through this. Joseph McCarthy is, he's a significant player during the early 50s. I'm going to have you watch this, all right? I am not going to watch this with you right now. And
say in the book that America,
we're going to keep going. And there's another one.
Mothers who never watch TV.
Okay, keep going. So you are going to, by reading the information in chapter 13 and watching those 2 videos, you will have what you need to have about Joseph McCarthy for the test. Now, the Hollywood 10. HUAC is investigating all kinds of people. You just need to know they're investigating, like hundreds of people come before HUAC. Well, they're going to target Hollywood. So they denounce, what they're worried about is they're worried that Hollywood is going to produce propaganda for the Soviet Union. And it's not going to be obvious propaganda. It's going to be subversive, meaning subtle. There's going to be subtle information presented in Hollywood films so that when people watch them, they're passing on information, right? That's what they're worried about. So HUAC claimed that the American motion picture industry was influenced by communists. Over 40 people were subpoenaed and either testified or cited their Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and avoid self-incrimination. There were 10 who defied the HUAC and they denounced the hearing and they refused to cooperate. So, these Hollywood 10 were comprised of screenwriters and directors who would be jailed and blacklisted. So they were jailed for a year and they were fined $1,000 and then they were blacklisted. So what blacklisted is you're put on a list and you do not get to do something. So in this case, they didn't get to work. So a number of them actually, when they were writing scripts, they used different names for their work. So some people that were blacklisted, Charlie Chaplin, you might know that name, Langston Hughes, that name might be familiar to you. He was a famous poet. Orson Welles, a writer and actor. Leonard Bernstein, a composer. Lena Horne, an actress and singer. And Dalton Trumbo. He was one of those screenwriters that wrote under a pseudonym, a fake name, and he would actually win awards on his work under his assumed name. Here are some pictures. Dalton Trumbo, the screenwriter. Oops, there's a typo there. Sorry about that. Leonard Bernstein, Lena Horne, Charlie Chaplin, Langston Hughes, Orson Welles. Some names you might be a little more familiar with. Lucille Ball. She, when she was younger, one of the first times she voted, you had to register like what party you are a member of, and her grandpa took her to vote, and he said, be a communist. So she clicked communist. Now, I don't know how active she was in the Communist Party, but that was why she was called in. J. Edgar Hoover, who is the head of the FBI, really loved Lucy. And so she didn't really suffer many consequences because of it. Eddie Albert, you may be familiar with him. You might not be familiar with him. He was also looked at for communism. And this is Will Geer. Will Geer, if you watch the Waltons, I don't know how many of you would, but when I was growing up, it was a very popular show. Will Geer he would play the grandpa on the Waltons. He was a member of the Communist Party and blacklisted at it for a time. He actually, instead of acting in movies for a while, he set up like a summer stock theater and acted there. Here's a little video about the Hollywood 10. It's only a minute and like 50 seconds. I'd like you to watch that, and then you're done. So that's what you need to do today. I'm going to stop this, and I hope that you just have a marvelous day. So when you're done with this, just know by the end of the week, you're going to have a test over chapter 13. And that is linked, but I will relink this. So anyway, stay warm and dry and snuggly. Okay.